Welcome to ECR Tools. Yes, we continue today following our last video where we discuss UK income and wealth inequalities as at 2023. Remember that the opinion expressed here is my own opinion based on public information that I've analyzed. Feel free to agree or disagree with me. This may be thought-provoking, what is discussed here, but is basically there to open up a dialogue on the subject to see what we can learn, through this discussion. Now, if you're new to the channel, remember to subscribe to its content, like and share this video, add your comments and contributions. Also, remember to hit that super thanks icon, which is below the right corner of your screen, as a contribution to help with the growth of this channel. Now, I'm going to go straight into the discussion on this matter of UK income and wealth inequalities. Now, before I basically get into that subject, it is important that we look at governance, the forms of governance, because you may find that later on in this discussion, you will get to know the relevance of it. So the various type of governance, the most popular one, which is democracy, which is a rule by the people or power of the people, that the governing bodies use in ruling a nation through elections. So basically, with the democracy, the people are electing their representatives to form the government that rules that particular nation. You do have, the system of a monarchy, which the rule is just by a king who basically is hereditary. They inherit power to rule over the people. Then you have something like totalitarianism, where you have the state having so much power and control over the entire people of a nation in deciding what they should do, how they should do it, what they should believe in, and things like that. It's not too far off from fascism, which was also very popular in sort of between 1919 and 1945 in places like Italy and Germany. You also have the dictatorship, which is a form of government which is very prevalent in African countries, where people take power by means of a military force and one person rules the people, and so that is dictatorship. Then we also have the oligarch system, where a group of people, a few people that are wealthy, may sometimes have a military power as well, rules over a nation, and therefore, the majority of the people don't have a say what is done and how things are done within that nation. You also have a governance such as communism, where obviously, the individual have no right of owning anything. Everything is owned under by the government and dictated by the government. Then you have socialism, which is also not too far off, but obviously that is just a cooperation basically within the nation, the society working together to the benefit of all. You also have governances such as colonialism, where a nation extends its sovereignty and power over other nations, and therefore putting their political and economic structures and social structures to control these other nations. And most of the time is to do very much with the exploitation of that nation's resources. Then you have a theocracy, which is also to do with form of governance that is basically based on religious power, or where you have the clergy ruling a nation. Then you also have the final one, which is the aristocracy, where you have very few people that are wealthy, basically the upper classes ruling the people based on their sort of education or sort of family or blood pedigree. And so you tend to find that with this type of governance as well, it's almost like hereditary, because once they establish themselves, then they basically, it goes from one generation to the next. But the reason why democracy has been the main form of governance in most Western society is just how bad these other forms of government have been in the world, and the brutality and suppression of the individual within a nation is the one that called for the democracy to become the most dominant form of governance, where it is the power of the people that rules through the election of representatives to go into government to govern the nation. And so with democracy, it only really works when certain structures are in place. And so some of the structures, the most important structures, are the separation of powers, whereby your executive, your legislature, and your judiciary should have separate powers, playing different functions within the government. This actually serves as some form of a sort of a check and balance. And so obviously checks and balances are one of the key components of a democratic system. And also you also have the independence of the judiciary. Then you also have the freedom and the neutrality of the press. Then you also have equality before the law. Then also freedom, the right of the individual, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of religion. So these are the pillars that are necessary within a democratic system to make it work and work well. So you probably see further on, as I go on to discuss this issue of wealth and income inequalities, you're going to see how the failure of these pillars or institutions within the democracy, when those components are not there, how it affects a democratic system of governance, and becomes sort of very detrimental to the workings of that nation. So we'll go on straight on to look at the issue of income and wealth inequalities. You may notice from the first video, we did talk about the beverage era within the UK. This was just after the Second World War in 1945, where Sir William Beveridge, who was a top civil servant, set up the welfare state as a way of eradicating poverty within the UK. This was mainly done around about 1945 under the then Labour government, which led to the establishment of things like the social housing, the National Health Service, social services, basically care for the elderly, for the for the young and also for the vulnerable in society. Then you had things like state transport, i.e., being the British Rail, the Red Route, buses, aiding, the free movement of people within Britain. And also you had things like, obviously, communication, which was all national institutions basically helping in the provision of work for the British people. But 78 years on, poverty is still at large in the UK. It is evident that a great deal of public workers are having to depend on food banks to basically survive in today's UK economy. And so 78 years on, we see that the dream or the vision of Sir William Beveridge is not really heading in the right direction. It is basically heading the opposite direction. And so this is why it is necessary for us to basically bring out a subject, to create a dialogue, to find out the possibility of finding solutions to this issue of the widening of the wealth and income gap within the UK. A situation where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And so you ask yourself, if this trend carries on, what does it mean for the average guy on the street in the United Kingdom? The next stage is basically going on to look at data, just to look at data from the Office for National Statistics, just to bring out the data to show the comparison within a period of time, and also looking at the UK as compared to other developed economies within Europe. Now, data from the Equality Trust basically states that the income inequalities within the UK is the highest amongst most of the developing nations in the Western economy. So it goes on to say that as at 2022, the average income for disposable income for the poorest, basically the average disposable income for your average home in the UK was £32,300 in 2022, and this included basically the wages, the cash, the benefits of these poorest, one should say poorest households. Now it goes on to also say that the income, the UK average, basically the median income, continued to rise round about sort of 2.2% for a period of time. However, this sort of rise in the median income has basically no value, or the value has been totally wiped out by rising inflation and also rising house prices. So in effect, what it is that you see in a sort of a steady rise in the sort of average or median income, but it's not really having any impact or any benefit to the average person in the UK. Then it also goes on to talk about sort of there about 2022, it goes on to say that 14 million of the poorest people, or poorest families within the UK lost 7.5% of their average income. That is just between 2020 and 2022. This is basically pre-COVID and post-COVID. That is how much money or how much income 14 million people in the UK, or basically the 40 million poorest, lost 7.5% of their income. However, the top, I will say, what is it? Basically, the top 1%, or the top is actually the fifth. The top fifth. So take it as a pie where you split it into, basically 5 halves. The top fifth had income increment of 7.8%. So basically, the bottom fifth lost 7.5. Then the top fifth gained 7.8% of income. Now, one will say, thanks to COVID, Brexit, cost of living crisis, and most recently, the rises of the base rate, currently as it stands about maybe the 17th time by the governor of the Bank of England. So this is what is causing the widening of this gap. Now, when these figures are quoted as in 7.5%, it may not seem that much, when you use that 7.5, but in reality, when you quantify it in pounds or in monetary terms, this is a huge chunk of shift of wealth from the very poor to the very rich. And so if we look at a future where this trend is going to continue, further projections actually indicate even more damaging effect to the average person on the street. Now, the data basically by the Equality Trust goes on also to say that as at 2022, your average, basically the poor households had an annual income of £13,218, whilst the top, basically that's the bottom 20%, had this sort of income, £13,218. And then the top 20% of income earners had 83,687. This is to do with annual disposable income. Now, if you go for an average UK budget, per annum, you realize that, putting your rent, your travel costs, your council tax, your food, shopping, your car, your fuel cost, and the lot. I did put up a budget in one of my videos. It comes up to roughly about 16,800. To have any kind of a decent kind of living, you need there about between 14 and 16,800 pounds. And so if you basically look at the data from the Equality Trust that says that the average poorest family income is £13,218, it then tells you that this is not going to be sufficient for the basic for the basic annual expenditure. And so you literally have zero savings. And it is only the top 20% that will sort of may live a life that will probably have some sort of savings. It also goes on to say that the richest fifth have incomes 12 times more than the bottom fifth. And so the Equality Trust once again goes on to create a chart. It's like a pie chart, or take it as a sphere or a circle with 5 halves. It goes on to tell you in each fifth how much income they control within the UK economy. And so when you take the bottom fifth, that is 1/5, the bottom fifth only have 8% of the total UK income. But the top fifth controls 36% of the total UK income. Now, the second fifth, basically at the bottom, they have 13% of UK income. Then the third fifth have 18%. Then the fourth fifth have 24% of UK income. And so in reality, if you basically take it from the third upwards, they control sort of, we'll say 3 by, if we say that's about 21%. So you then find that probably over half of the UK population, that is people that are considered to have basically at the poor end, which is about half, only control about 21%, or only have 21% of the total UK income. So it goes on to tell you the level of income disparity. But the ONS, Office for National Statistics, even puts this better. The Office for National Statistics states that in 2020, the richest 10%, and this one basically is now talking about wealth. So there is a difference between income disparity and wealth disparity. And when you take the wealth one, it's actually even wider. And so the ONS does state that as of 2020, 10% of the richest control 43% of the total wealth in the United Kingdom. And the poorest 50% controls 9% of total wealth in the UK. These figures were basically issued by the ONS in 2020. But then it goes on to say, as at 2023, in the UK, the richest 50 families, right, they own half of the wealth of the entire UK. Basically, the wealth that they own is equivalent to half of the population, basically. Yeah, that's the way to say it. So 50 families have wealth that is more than half the population of the UK. So the half of the population, the ONS puts it at 33.5 million. So you have 50 families that have wealth that is more than half of the population of the UK. it goes on to actually say that if this trend continues in the future, in the probably by 2035, 200 families will have wealth that will be more than the annual GDP of the United Kingdom. So these are staggering figures and definitely a concern. And so unless there's going to be some sort of an alternative government that may come in to use things like taxes and regulations and policies and controls to basically hold this position or reverse this type of a trend, then the situation looks very bleak for the average person. The question, therefore, is why is the trend basically continuing in this way? Once again, this is where we come back to the governance. So we are having a diluted democracy. So we have a democracy in the UK now. It's almost like some sort of oligarchs that are controlling the United Kingdom. So you sort of, the average person goes in and do their normal voting and think they're getting somebody. Basically, it's just like the two parties, you're choosing in between one of, basically you're choosing in between two parties, but they are basically the same. So you're choosing one of the same thing. This is what you're being offered. And this, if there isn't so much of a difference between the parties and their ideology, then you really, the electorate does not really have much of any choice, really. Then if you go to things like the independence of the press, you are going to find that the press is not they are not neutral. They are not neutral. And I don't even know whether they are independent. And so then if you go to the judiciary, you are going to find that because of the amalgamation, basically, of power through all these gentleman clubs and stuff like that, one couldn't also say that the judiciary is so independent at this time, or the individual, once again, if you're poor, you couldn't maybe access your legal rights as much as you should, or there has to be institutions in there to allow you to access those rights. But now, you don't have those rights. Citizens advice bureaus have closed down. Where anything to do with legal matters, if you don't have money, it's not going to happen for you. And so this becomes a problem. And so you also have lots of conflict of interest, where you may have obviously a leader, an elected leader, or probably not elected by the people, but elected by a few people, as we have now in the United Kingdom, where you have a prime minister that's not elected by the people. Then you are having that type of a diluted democracy. And so rules are being made not in the interest of the people, but maybe in the interest of the people that are making the rules, because in as much as they are in political power, they also have business interest, and so they are making rules to favor themselves rather than rules to favor the nation. And so all these type of things becomes a problem. This is why the gap, the income and wealth gap within the UK continues to widen, because the poor guy doesn't have any money to maybe invest in shares and these complex or invest in property, or they don't have that money. All that they have is a little money, which probably is in savings. But then you have a situation where your prime minister, a chancellor, prints money, which then creates inflation, and then it wipes out the value of the savings of the poor. And so these are the type of things that are sort of going on that is not helping the situation of the poor. So that's one of the issues. And so then you have the issues with, Brexit and COVID, and obviously the issues with the rising interest rates, which once again in the next few months is going to cause major problems for your average struggling family that is trying to own their property. They may go for a reassessment when their fixed term ends, and then find that they may just have to sell their property. And so these are all problems that continue to exacerbate the issue of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Things like Brexit and COVID also have been used by maybe employers basically reducing incomes or salaries, whilst they are actually charging higher prices for services. They are paying staff less and less, and creating that problem where people are basically selling their labor for cheap and not getting much for the services that they render in the society. So that is also a problem. Now, you then ask yourself, as in, you ask yourself, what is the solution? We're looking for the solution. What is the solution? So, in the past, you would have had basically alternative governments where there was a real distinction between the ideology of the Labour and the Conservative Party, such that the electorate felt that they had some sort of an option of choosing in between two different things. But now they don't have that option. They are choosing in between one of the same two. You're choosing in between the same thing. So you're not being offered much of a choice. And so it doesn't look great where you're struggling to find where the answer is going to be. So if you have any comments, contributions, do put that in the comments box to see what we can all learn from this issue. And so I hope you've liked this video. Just remember to share it, and hopefully we will come back next time to probably delve a little bit deeper into the various forms of governance in a society. Thank you for watching EC Artos.